It's Friday here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by one of our great Steelers beat writers, Brian Batko. We're going to break down Steelers-Bengals, but before we get into that and our pick six for the weekend, I want to talk to you guys about how different players can get better involved in the Steelers offense. We've talked about improving the red zone. We've talked about moving the ball, Russell Wilson, all that stuff. But who can get better involved from the playmaking standpoint? We'll talk about that here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Brian Batko, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find every Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, including Chipped Ham and Football every Tuesday with Brian Batko as he talks to different guests from around the country.
We had Ben Baby from Cincinnati on this week, so make sure to check that out if you want some more insight on the Bengals and kind of what their mindset is at 4-7.
Absolutely, Ben Baby, friend of the show. He's been ESPN, on our stuff here several times before. So shout out to him. Thanks for him making the appearance. But as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. All right, Brian. Let's talk about the Steelers offense for a little bit because this is a big game against a divisional opponent. It's on the road, coming off a loss. The Steelers need to rebound to get to their 9th win of the season and try to keep the pace ahead of the Baltimore Ravens, who have a big game that we'll talk about later in the show. But when you're playing the Bengals, you're playing a team that loves to score a lot on offense, but their defense hasn't been as sharp. So for the Steelers offense to get it back together, they're going to need to try to work the ball to certain guys. I feel like the Bengals will probably trying to take away George Pickens as much as possible. If you're the Steelers, how do you try to involve more guys in your offense, or who do you look to involve more in your offense this week versus what you've done the past couple weeks?
Yeah, I've got 3 names for you, Chris. I think number 1, Pat Freiermuth. He had a huge game down there last year in Cincinnati. When they played the Bengals again, a few weeks later, he put up a goose egg stat line, but I mean, he was completely right after the game by saying they wanted to take me away because of what I did the first time. And that's cool. I'll block and we can go to the outside. Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, those guys had the big games in that one. But I think now is the time where the Bengals are dealing with some issues in the secondary, specifically, not only is free safety Geno Stone struggling based on my conversation with Ben Baby of ESPN, but also Von Bell, their strong safety, who's been a thorn in the Steelers' side a lot over the years. It looks like his playing time might decrease as well. So this could be a game where Pat Freiermuth can feast a little bit over the middle, pun intended. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. And also, Logan Wilson, their inside linebacker, is really good, but Mike Tomlin talked Tuesday about how they're blitzing him more and using him as an extra pass rusher. So that could open up some of the quick game for Russell Wilson. It looked like the rapport was coming along a little with Freiermuth last week in Cleveland. So maybe they can get a little bit more of that going and do so more consistently down the stretch here when the weather is going to get rough. And, maybe some of the short to intermediate throws are going to be more crisp, easier to make than those moon balls.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that the Steelers could really use getting more of those guys involved, especially in the red zone, where we talked about with Rafe and Apollo on Wednesday, because Mike Tomlin on Tuesday talked about, hey, they spent extra time during the mini bye week after Thursday night football, studying what they need to be better there, how they need to be better and what they need to do there and being sharp there. And that's one area in particular where I think that these guys can be more involved. Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, also one Mike Williams. Was going
to be my second one. I was going to bring up Mike Williams for sure. I mean, we haven't seen much of him, Chris. I mean, other than the Commanders' game-winning catch, there was the first deep shot to Calvin Austin last Thursday night, obviously in Cleveland, Mike Williams had one-on-one coverage on the outside, and watching from the press box at Huntington Bank Field, I really thought Russell Wilson was going to go to him on that one. But obviously, he anticipated Calvin Austin breaking open down the seam. So, credit to both of those guys for making it work. And then he got crushed on a big hit by the Browns. So it's not as if Mike Williams, isn't giving him opportunities. And I also think it was a whirlwind for him since getting traded here from the Jets. He was trying to get his bearings. The Steelers were already in a mode that didn't include him on offense. But now you've had the mini bye and, a lot of the self-evaluation that Mike Tomlin mentioned on Tuesday. You had a bonus practice to work Williams in there. So this, to me, would be the jumping off point to utilize him more the rest of the season. Van Jefferson had a nice 39-yard catch against the Browns. It was actually one of those ones that took me back to training camp where I'm like, couldn't quite see from my vantage point. I was like, was that George Pickens? No, that was actually Van Jefferson. Good job by him. But I think he was a good bridge to get you from the beginning of the season to now. And I just think Mike Williams probably gives you a little bit higher ceiling as that, de facto wide receiver 2 than Van Jefferson has to this point.
Yeah, I think that especially with what the way the Steelers want to throw the ball, Mike Williams being another outside threat across from George Pickens is going to open up a lot because either one of them is going to get a one-on-one and both of them are good jump ball guys, or if they're going to be spending, if it's going to keep teams have 2 deep safeties, that's going to open up the run more. It's going to open up the middle part of the field more, and that gets more chances for guys like Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. The Steelers traded for this guy for a reason, so use him. And I think that's like you said, it takes time to work a guy in. There's been a moving train. It's been also some quick weeks. Especially with Thursday Night Football last week, and you got to get ready for the Ravens and things like that. But now's the time. I think that you can get this guy, involved, and especially when you get to the red zone. I mean, you essentially can have a double tight end package where you have Najee Harris in the backfield and 2 receivers, and you have 4 guys that you feel comfortable in jump ball situations: George Pickens, Mike Williams, Darnell Washington, Pat Freiermuth. All 4 of those guys can go up and get it, out jump.
Not Cordero Patterson.
And see, that's where I was going to go to, is because on that 2-point conversion, not that would have sealed the deal for the Steelers. Granted, they could have helped. Could have fought for field goal position instead of a Hail Mary at the end. But why is it Cordero Patterson running the fade there when you have 4 dudes who literally do that better than him? And I think that's something that Arthur
I think there might be 10 dudes who do that better than him at this point, but I digress. I think you're right though, Chris. Like, it's kind of like a basketball coach when you get into March and you got to shorten the rotation, right? I mean, yeah. I think Arthur Smith needs to shorten the rotation somewhat, shorten the personnel groupings and football parlance. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that kind of one of the knocks on him that Falcons fans had, was trying to get too many guys involved? And I think some of the stuff about lack of touches for Bijan Robinson was overblown because he did touch the ball a lot, but I know there was frustration from Atlanta fans about just, why are we giving the ball to this guy on the goal line? Why are we throwing to this guy, getting a little bit too creative? So I think it is time to kind of pare things down a bit. I don't need to see the package with Cordero Patterson, Connor Hayward, Spencer Anderson, Darnell Washington, and Michael Pruitt. I get it. It's a bunch of big bodies who can block. Maybe that was just a 1-week game plan thing to try to take care of the Browns and their attacking 4-man front. But no, I mean, I just don't think that's the best usage of your personnel. And players over plays a lot of times is what you hear in the NFL when things aren't going well for an offense. So more Mike Williams for me, less Van Jefferson, less Connor Hayward, that I think, and less Michael Pruitt. I do think he was, schemed to be part of the attack against the Browns because of his blocking ability, and they can trust him in that regard. But yeah, I think we've seen enough of a lot of that. And the third guy I want to say, who I think looks like he's picking up steam after a slow start to the season, Najee Harris is maybe losing a little bit of juice because of how many touches he's garnered to this point. And he was running really well, really hard. Less was more for him earlier in the season when he was ripping off 100-yard games 3 games in a row. But Jaylen Warren, I think for the first time this season, these last couple weeks, has been the more effective back than Najee. And I'm not saying he should touch the ball more, but time to start, scaling down the gap between those two and making it more of a 50-50 split and seeing how that can help the run game going forward.
Look, all offseason, we talked about how these two as a 1-2 punch are valuable to this offense. Using them as an actual 1-2 punch would certainly go a long way. I don't think we've seen the game where both of them have taken over. It's sort of been an
Warren was banged up a
situation.
lot. Yeah, Warren was banged up a lot early, so he couldn't really be of much help. But now I think they're both in good position to get all the carries. No more Cordero Patterson. Really any running back snaps for him unless there's an injury, I think.
Right, agreed. Warren has fumbled at a key point in the red zone, but I think other than that, he's been pretty solid when called upon as well. But we got a lot more to break down here. Steelers-Bengals predictions coming up, but also we got to get to our pick six, where we look at 6 other games this weekend and we'll give you our thoughts on how those will play out next year on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, what remind you, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. Well, for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder Associates have helped injury victims answer that very question: what's next? Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with the insurance companies, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle the what's next question. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko here on a Friday. Happy belated Thanksgiving to everyone out there. It's time for our pick six, where we give you our top 6 Thanksgiving Day foods. Brian, go.
Turkey, mashed potatoes, corn, stuffing, rolls, and sweet potatoes.
My man, you cleaned it up right there. I think we're on the same exact page. Yams, I'd put a little bit higher, but yes, I agree on all.
Is that too much potatoes? I don't even care, because I'm mixing my mashed potatoes and corn. It's so good. And then the yams with the marshmallows in there, definitely crushing that.
Absolutely. Crushing all of that. I love them. See, I don't even need the marshmallows. Just give me straight up yams. Just give me the yams. Get some brown cinnamon mixes up in there.
I like the marshmallow. You know I'm a degenerate.
You are a degenerate. That is very true.
To quote Mike Tomlin, marshmallows on the yams. I'm a degenerate.
He's silly. All right, now we get to wax your pick six and the picking 6 games this weekend. All right, Brian, let's start with a Sunday 1:00-er, an unusual matchup that you don't see too often. It's the Chargers at the Falcons. Chargers are 1.5-point favorites here. Chargers right now 7-4 after a tough loss to the Ravens. They're trying to stay in the AFC playoff picture. Meanwhile, the Falcons clinging on to life in the NFC South with a 6-5 record atop the NFC South. Brian, I have the Chargers winning this one. They almost could have. They could have had the Ravens. I think these teams are decent teams, but I think the Chargers are a better team.
Agreed. I'm taking the Chargers as well. I think I've said on the show before that the Falcons just seem like a team that's destined to sort of ping back and forth throughout the season, from one game above 500, one game below 500, right at 500. So if they lose this one, they'll be right at 6-6. And yes, I think the Chargers bounce back from what was an emotional loss, but still a game they mostly played pretty well in against the Ravens.
Absolutely. Let's move to our next game here in the pick six, an AFC South showdown. The Houston Texans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Texans are 4.5-point favorites in this one. The Jaguars basically out of the picture, but you never know with divisional games. The Texans have also been a team that's pinged back and forth a lot more than I think some people thought that they would. They're 7-5 right now. And, if they're not careful, they might have to be looking over their shoulders, because the Colts are 5-7, just 2 games back from them. So they need to kind of win the winnable games here. And this certainly is one. I think they handled this one, Brian. I think that the Texans find a way to win. But should the Texans be on upset alert here?
No, the Jaguars haven't beaten the Texans in Jacksonville since 2017, and it ain't going to be this week. Like, the Texans are a little strange. I mean, losing to the Titans, that was a worse loss than the Steelers losing to the Browns in Cleveland. Losing to Tennessee at home is brutal, and giving up 32 points to Will Levis in the process for sure. But the Jaguars, last time we saw this team, Chris, they lost 52-6 to the Lions. And I thought no coach has ever been more fired than Doug Peterson was fired that day. And yet he's still there. So I have no idea what the vibes are like in Duval County right now. I can't imagine they're very good. And these guys are just trying to limp to the finish line. No, I think the Texans are going to blow them out.
I feel you here. We move along to other games here. Let's look at Cardinals at Vikings. This is actually a very intriguing matchup in my opinion. The Vikings are 3.5-point favorites in this one. The Cardinals are tied. Actually, they're behind. I don't know why I guess
they're slipping. They're slipping a little bit.
They're slipping a little bit. They're 6-5 in the very hotly contested NFC West. They're tied with the Seahawks. I guess because the Seahawks have beaten the Cardinals, they are ahead in the current tiebreakers when it comes to the Cardinals. But they're both at 6-5 in the NFC West. Meanwhile, in the NFC North, the Vikings are 9-2, but they are not in first place because the Lions are 10-1, and the Green Bay Packers are right behind them at 8-3. So this is two teams in second place in their division right now, duking it out. And again, the Vikings are 3.5-point favorites. I've been going back and forth about this game because I really like some of the things the Cardinals do. And I'm going to take the Cardinals simply because I think that this is time for Kyler Murray to take over in this game versus Sam Darnold. You said all season long, you don't believe in Sam Darnold, Brian Batko. Are you a man of your word, or are you going back on it this week?
Jonathan Gannon, the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, had one of my favorite moments this offseason. He said he and his staff did a deep dive about whether momentum exists, and everybody in the building was kind of looking into it. And then he said the answer is perhaps. Well, right now, I think the Cardinals do not have the momentum. They had their bye week after going on a nice run. Then they lose a week ago to the Seahawks. And I never pick Sam Darnold, but I'm picking Sam Darnold in this game. I think the Vikings hold serve at home here, and I actually do so pretty handily. I think it's nice when you're the team that doesn't have to make a long trip on a holiday week. So, yeah, Brian Flores will send a bunch of guys at Kyler Murray, do some exotic things, and Minnesota's offense is humming right now.
And you say that as I'm going to be a guy making a couple trips during the holiday weekend here. I'll be at Ohio State Pitt basketball in Ohio State on today, actually, if you're watching and listening to this on Friday, and then making the trip out with you guys to Cincinnati this weekend. But let's get to the other big matchups here. Three really interesting later games in this weekend, and that Steelers fans, I think, are going to have their eyes on after Steelers-Bengals. One is definitely, I think, in my opinion, this is the game of the week. Eagles at Ravens. The Ravens are 3-point favorites at home over the Eagles. But, man, I go back and forth on who I like in this game. And you know what? I think I like the Eagles. Give me Philly going into Baltimore doing some damage. Jalen Hurts and company. Saquon Barkley's looking unstoppable. This could be the best two running backs in football duking it out in this game. But I like the Eagles defense to handle this better than the Ravens defense will. What say you, Brian? Am I crazy here picking the dirty birds? I guess not the dirty birds. There's the birds. No, the birds. Go birds.
How dare you?
Johnny McCown very disappointed.
I agree. I'm so pumped for this game. I might just not even do any work after Steelers-Bengals. I might just get up to the press box and tune in for Eagles-Ravens. The Andy Weidel Bowl, the two teams he worked for before he came to the Steelers. A lot of similarities between the two organizations, in addition to the geography. I think I'm picking against you again on this one, Chris. The Ravens really got up off the mat after taking some early punches from the Chargers, and I think that going for that fourth down, backed up on their own 15 or whatever it was, just lit a fire under these guys. Pivotal moment in that game. Maybe it'll be a pivotal moment in their season, but at least give them a boost for another week. I think the Ravens faithful will be all fired up. I'm sure there'll be plenty of Eagles fans there at M&T Bank Stadium as well. But I think Lamar Jackson and company run on the Eagles a little bit and find a way to beat, the only other one of the other rosters in the NFL that might be more complete than them from top to bottom. But I'm going to go with the Lamar Jackson ace up the sleeve card here.
Interesting. This next matchup, though, I think preseason and even early season, everyone looked at this on the schedule and circled it and said, this is going to be huge. But lately, This looks like this could be a blowout, in my opinion. And Vegas thinks the same way. The Bills host the Niners, and the Bills are 6.5-point favorites. Brian, the Bills.
Maybe we shouldn't have even picked this game, Chris. Maybe we should have picked Colts at Patriots. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not doing that.
Well, you did say the Colts are they're gaining some ground, maybe on the tech. Well, they're not because they lost last week, but they're hanging around in the AFC South.
Hanging around. Kid got
but this ain't Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Anthony Richardson, Drake May. But all right, we're picking Niners Bills though, right?
Thank you for letting me get to there. My point here is this: it's a 6.5-point spread, and give me the Bills with the points. They're going to demolish the Niners in this game. What say you?
I do not disagree with you. I think the Bills, they might have overtaken the Chiefs for me as the best team in the NFL. It seems like everything there is just clicking right now. And yes, I think they're going to dispatch the 49ers rather easily because Kyle Shanahan and company are going through some dysfunctional times, which is unusual for them. But they've also had a bunch of injuries. They've also had Brandon Allen starting last week. So Brock Purdy, I imagine less than 100%. All of that a recipe for what should have been a really good Sunday night football game. But I'm with you, Chris. I think it's going to be a bit of a snoozer.
I think so too. This one, I think Monday Night Football, Steelers fans will keep an eye on just to see how it plays out. But the Broncos are 5.5-point home favorites against those Cleveland Browns that just came off their win over the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Browns getting a little bit of extended of a less mini bye with their Monday Night Football game coming off of a Thursday Night Football game. But they're headed into Denver. Denver getting to 5.5 points. I gotta say, Brian, I'm impressed by Denver. I thought when the Steelers beat them, they beat a team that wasn't as bad as some people thought it was. But they're 7-5 now, and they're right behind. They're a half game behind the Chargers. Bo Nix has actually had some really good games. I did not peg him to have those in this season. Give me the Broncos winning at home. I think that they find a way to get it done. I think their defense is pretty solid, and that they'll find a way to get a win here. What say you about the Monday Night Football matchup?
I could go either way on this one, Chris, but I prefer to disagree with you when given the chance. So I'm going to take Jameis Winston and the Cleveland Browns, pretty hefty underdogs on the road. I'm going against my own logic of making a long trip over the holiday week, but Jameis is going to be singing Jingle Bells. He's going to be talking about how amazing it is they get to play in the elevation and up in the mountains and how beautiful the Rockies are just outside of Empower Field at Mile High Stadium. So I like the vibes that he brought to the table on Thursday Night Football. Now he gets another primetime game on Monday Night Football, revenge game for Jerry Jeudy, the team that traded him to Cleveland in the offseason, which is like getting sent to Siberia in the NFL. Browns find a way to pull it out on the road.
Browns over Broncos. We got some splits here, buddy. This is going to be interesting between some of these picks here. But
you know what? We never keep track. We're always just like,
we don't.
Whatever. You guys can keep the tally for yourself if you want. But I made some wild picks this year, so I'm probably not doing well.
No, I
just made another one.
You just made it. Yeah, you made some wild. But yeah, I think you make picks to spite me, and that's what.
This one I kind of did. Like I said, I was kind of 50-50. It was a coin flip. So I might as well spite you if I'm on the fence at all.
There you have it. We picked the most important game.
I almost picked the Browns to beat the Ravens earlier this season. I didn't do it, and I should have because they did. So
they did.
Cleveland. Yeah. Do me a solid here. Help me out.
We'll get to our picks in the most important game of the week for Steelers fans. That's Steelers at Bengals next here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, to remind you, this show is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them now for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard, Moon Township, or at their website, moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
It's that time of year again to get the Honda of your dreams during Happy Honda Days, where you'll find great offers on a sporty new Civic, spirited Accord, fun to drive HR-V, and versatile CR-V. So don't wait. Turn your holiday dreams into reality with a new Honda named KBB.com's best value brand. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
Hello, welcome back to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Brian Batko, and it's time to take a closer look at Steelers-Bengals. The Bengals go into this weekend 2.5-point favorites over the Steelers. That was made early in the week by Vegas, and it's been maintained throughout. The over-under has moved up to 47.5. It was 46.5 at the start of the week. So interesting thoughts there on where Vegas sees this matchup here. But as always, Brian, Vegas always gives 3 points to the home team. So I think Vegas sees this as a pretty even matchup as far as roster versus roster here. Brian, what's the most important X factor the Steelers have to get right if they want to win this game?
I think it's trying to contain the Burrow to Chase connection because, I mean, they were so good against the Ravens. They were still pretty good in their last time out against the Chargers. They couldn't find a way to win either one of those games, but I think eventually, if you keep putting up those kind of numbers, your defense is going to get a stop at some point. So, both sides here have some issues to deal with for the opposing offenses. For the Bengals, I think it's more about their own struggles in the secondary. For the Steelers, it's more about facing a really well-oiled machine with those two guys. So I think avoiding the big plays there, avoiding the defensive lapses, not letting Jamar Chase break this game open is the biggest thing that I point to, because unlike Steelers-Ravens a couple weeks ago, where it was kind of like, all right, everything says, this game's traditionally a slugfest, but this year it's actually going to be a shootout. Well, that didn't prove to be true. This game, everything says it's going to be a shootout, and I think it is going to be a shootout. I think there's going to be a lot of points scored, and it's not going to be one of those old school, hard-hitting Steelers-Bengals games.
I think that there's a lot more chance of it to happen in this game, too. Plus, the Bengals defense, I know the Ravens defense was giving up the most passing yards in the NFL going into that game, but as Mike Tomlin said, and as I was kind of looking at on film, like this, the Ravens defense is better than the pure yards numbers panned out. This Bengals defense, though, not as much. They're missing. They don't have the Kyle Hamilton in their safety room that can make a lot of really great plays in the back end for them. They do have Trey Hendrickson. They can get after the quarterback, but they're not as proficient in stuffing the run. And I think that's where the Steelers have to be able to dictate the pace here. Limit T. Higgins, limit Jamar Chase, limit Joe Burrow. Don't let those guys take over the game for you. But the Bengals, they're in the bottom third in the league when it comes to defending the pass. They're in the bottom third of the league when it comes to defending the run. Their defense is giving up the 5th most points in the NFL right now. This needs to be a week where the Steelers offense, it's got to be a get right week for Russell Wilson and the Steelers offense. And I don't think it's as much about Russell Wilson. I don't mean to pick on him there, because I think he actually played pretty well against the Browns, all things considered, playing in a blizzard. But this needs to be the week of no excuses. The red zone work that they put in has to pay off. This needs to be a week where the offense, if the defense gets some stops, the offense pours it on, and they put Joe Burrow in this offense in a hole that gives them a chance to maybe make some more turnover-worthy plays in the later parts of this game.
Yeah, Russ played well against the Browns, but I do think the flip side of it would be he needs to do a better job of not holding onto the ball and taking some of those sacks that can knock you out of field goal range or force you to get behind the sticks, or, 3 and outs. Any 3 and out in this game might come back to bite you. And, there hasn't been much going for the Bengals pass rush this year other than Trey Hendrickson, who's got 11.5 on the season. So we saw what Myles Garrett did to Dan Moore on those first couple sacks, and then they moved him around. So Dan's going to have to be better. We've seen the struggles Broderick Jones has gone through this season, not last week notwithstanding. I think he did a fine job holding up his end of the bargain against, obviously the lesser of the 2 edge rushers for the Browns. But both of those tackle spots could be problems for the Steelers for different reasons. If Russell Wilson does have time, he should pick apart this Bengals secondary. Their corners are maybe going to be the worst set of outs. Mike Hilton's still solid as their slot corner, and got to be wary of him. That's going to be one of my key matchups to watch in the scouting report in Sunday's paper this week, is Russell Wilson versus Hilton, because he could come in on a blitz, he can jump a route and go the other way. He's always like needling the Steelers in this matchup since they let him walk in free agency a few years ago. He's been a spark plug for the Bengals for sure. But the outside corners are dumpster juice, Chris. Cam Taylor-Britt's having a terrible season. DJ Turner is on IR. I mean, he was their best shutdown guy on one of the other sides. The other dudes playing are kind of no names. I mean, Ben Baby was telling me Josh Newton's been solid, but he's a rookie. So they should be able to take advantage of these guys. And it's going to be up to DC, Lou Anarumo, and Cincy to come up with some different schematic ways to keep George Pickens, Mike Williams, and company from popping off.
All right. Well, that being said, looking at all those matchups here, Brian, how do you see this game playing out? What's the biggest factor in your decision here? And what's your final score prediction?
Despite all those X's and O's that we laid out there, Chris, my biggest factor is going to come down to just a good old-fashioned who wants it more, who needs it more. And the Bengals, last I checked, according to Pro Football Network, 7.8% chance of making the playoffs. That might as well be under 1%. If they lose this game, they want to have any hope of going on a magical run down the stretch here in December. They're going to need to beat their interdivision foes at home in Cincy. I think they find a way to get it done. I'm going to go and a lot of points scored by both sides. I think the Steelers offense will figure out some things, but I think the defense is just going to have a hard time keeping down Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and those guys from first quarter to fourth quarter. So I'm going to go Bengals 29, Steelers 27.
Bengals 29, Steelers 27. I also think it'll be close. I think there'll be more points scored in this
cover.
game. The Steelers do cover that situation.
I love to split the difference like that.
But I look at one thing that I have had a hard time shaking, and it's gotten harder and harder as the year has gone on. The Bengals have not beaten anybody. And I know people like to say that about the Steelers until they beat, a 6-win Falcons team, a 7-win Ravens team, a 7-win Commanders team, and all those teams. But they still haven't been, and the Chargers are 7 wins. They still haven't beaten anybody, the Steelers. Well, but if you apply that logic to the Steelers, what'd you say?
That's dumb if people say that about the Steelers, but
a lot of people do. But if you say that about the Steelers, you better be singing from the highest heavens about the Bengals. Their 4 wins and their 4-7 record are the Panthers, the Giants, the Browns, the Raiders.
I didn't say that. Don't get mad at me, Chris.
No, because I've been telling you that the Bengals were pretenders for months now. And every time no, I think they're going to beat the Ravens. No, I think they're going to beat the Eagles. No, I think they're going to beat the Ravens. No, I think they're going to beat the Chargers. And they flop every single time. Maybe they get it done. This is a divisional game. They're coming off a bye.
You're coming at me like you're coming at Charles Davis, who's calling the game again this weekend for CBS.
Listen, buddy. If you wrote like Charles Davis covered broadcasts, we'd have problems because
you're tripping. Charles Davis is a nice man. He does a fine job. You need to cool it.
He's a friend of your podcast, and I give him that. But man, that dude be looking at TJ Watt getting strangle-held on the ground and be thinking like, that's great blocking there. And I just don't.
He's gonna rest, Chris. He's not. Come on. We're disagreeing hard. We're disagreeing more over Charles Davis. We will
disagree very harshly on Charles Davis, just like we will disagree on the result of this game. Less harshly though. I think this does go down to the wire.
Steelers for some reason. Why would he not like the Steelers?
We'll talk off camera about that.
All right.
It's more so that. But I have the Steelers winning 27-23. I think this comes down to a late drive from Russell Wilson where he's able to deliver, and the Steelers defense has to defend a longer field this time. And this time they get it done against the Bengals. The Bengals, and to their credit, the Bengals, they haven't beaten a good team yet, but they have been on the precipice. They lost by 7 to the Chargers. They lost by 1 to the Ravens and 3 to the Ravens. They did get blown out by the Eagles. That wasn't close. But they lost by 5 to the Commanders and 1 point to the Chiefs. They've been on the precipice a lot this year. And I think their biggest problem is Zach Taylor and that team have not closed out games well. I think that's what happens here. The Steelers find a way to edge them out.
They didn't lose to the Browns in Cleveland, so they do have that going for them.
They did beat the Browns in Cleveland, but again, I think it's when you look at the good teams that have played them this year, they have continued to falter against them. We'll see if the Steelers can be one of those teams that they falter against. We'll both be covering that there in Cincinnati this Sunday, 1 p.m., giving you all our coverage. Get all of our coverage throughout the rest of the weekend, too, here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com, from Chris Carter and Brian Batko. Thank you so much for joining the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Remember, we come out every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right here on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube, as well as the daily content, including Chip Taman Football from Brian Batko. We'll also have our guys in Cincinnati giving you their thoughts right after the game. And then, of course, the Monday North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Stay tuned for all of that here right on the North Shore Drive podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.